Welcome, everybody, to Awaken. This is where we share insights on the connection between science and spirituality for self-discovery, joy, and freedom. I am your host and spiritual coach, Stephanie Rouch, and I am so pleased today to be speaking with Dr. Marilyn Schlitz. She is an acclaimed social scientist, award-winning author of a number of books, and a charismatic public speaker. She has conducted clinical, lab, and field-based research into consciousness, human transformation, and healing. Her books include Living Deeply, The Art and Science of Transformation in Everyday Life, Consciousness and Healing, Integral Approaches to Mind-Body Medicine, Death Makes Life Possible, which also has a companion film by the same title that was promoted on Oprah years ago, and her most current book and first novel, Love Study, that we will be diving into at some point in this interview. And having taught at Stanford, Harvard, and Trinity University, she is currently the professor of transpersonal psychology at Sophia University and the CEO and president emeritus and senior fellow at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. Dr. Schlitz has published hundreds of articles in scholarly journals and popular publications and has lectured extensively in diverse venues, including the United Nations, the Smithsonian Institution, the Commonwealth Club, and community groups across the world. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining. Please introduce yourself, Marilyn. Add any color that you'd like to that intro.
Well, thank you, Stephanie, for having me. And it's always a delight to reach out and talk to people from different, worldviews and lifestyles. And so I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much. And as you mentioned, I have just published my first novel, which has been great fun. And it, is based on a true story, but we can jump into that later. I'm not sure I have anything more colorful than that.
Well, I can't wait to hear about that. And just seeing your background, you have really done such a deep dive into consciousness, studying consciousness, writing about it, and bridging that gap between scientific and scholarly articles and this more elusive spirituality that is such an integral part of who we are. And I would love to hear from you, what motivated you to go on this life path of really creating a beautiful career integrating science and spirituality?
Well, it always starts somewhere. And, my path probably started as early as 18 months old when I was an inquisitive toddler. And as toddlers do, I was reaching out and exploring things and putting things in my mouth. And it happened to be a can of lighter fluid, which led me into the emergency room and in and out of the hospital for a period of time. And I think that there was something in that, even though it's not conscious. I was too young really to remember it. But there was something about my deep appreciation and reverence for the health professionals, the doctors, the nurses, the candy stripers, all of that was really powerful. Then when I was 16, I was somewhere I shouldn't have been, with somebody I shouldn't have been with, on the back of a motorcycle at closing time of the bars. And we were hit by a drunk driver, and my body was hurled off the bike. And I really had one of these, kind of proverbial out-of-body experiences. I watched my body tumbling through the air, landed with a kaplunk. And so there was something in that experience that awakened me to the kind of reaches of consciousness beyond just the physical. And, I ended up with 66 stitches in my leg. It was a serious cut. Fortunately, it wasn't more than that. And so they talked about the possibility of having to amputate my leg, sent me home to heal. And I remember laying on the couch in my parents' living room and really wondering about whether I could harness my imagination to heal my body. And I have no idea. My father was a tool and die maker. My mom was a housewife. I have no idea where that idea came from. But somehow I began to visualize my immune system healing my leg, feeling the tingles going up my leg. And sure enough, when I went back and had the cast removed, they found that I was, on the mend. So that said to me, again, there was something about consciousness, something about the connection between mind and body. And so both of those things, I think, while traumatic, were pivotal in terms of setting me on a journey. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. It was at a time when, the world is always in crisis, and it was a particularly volatile time period. And I remember really wishing I could do something to affect positive change in the world. And, as a teenager, I was impotent. I didn't feel that I really had that. I mean, I led the Save the World's campaign at my high school, stuff like that, but it wasn't really, paradigmatic in the sense. And when I went to college, I read this book by Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo 14 astronaut, called Psychic Exploration. And it really was about how scientists were looking very seriously at the powers and potentials of our mind and our consciousness and our psychic capacities, our healing capacities. And I thought, well, this is really interesting. This is something that could make a difference in the world. And so that set me on an odyssey. And I went to different research labs. I spoke at various places, as you mentioned, published and, got involved in collaborations with people from all over the world, really. I've been privileged to travel extensively. And so I think those are the things that really, launched my career.
Awesome. Well, given your decades of experience really studying consciousness and transformation and healing, this mind-body healing, what are some of the insights that you see come up again and again across when you're looking at it from different perspectives?
Well, having been in this field now for quite a long time, decades, the fact that things do change. I remember, in the early 80s, something like biofeedback, which is now considered, standard care,
Mhm.
was was anathema to the medical establishment. It was very controversial. And I remember people wanting to do research or use it as an intervention in hospitals, and they were prohibited from doing so. So that's something that is exciting to me, is the ability to see change and to see that we have made a lot of progress. We have deepened our understanding with science. We've developed different methodologies in science to explore some of these less conventional, less physicalist ideas. And so, that intrigues me. I think the field of consciousness has blossomed. Again, nobody talked about it. It was not acceptable to talk about. It certainly wasn't a valid domain for scientific inquiry. And now it's everywhere, even looking at this field of non-dual consciousness, like that 10 years ago wasn't even happening. And now it's just everywhere. So I think, really staying true to whatever our North Star is, pushing forward to engage in things. I know, just personally, my mother in particular was like very against me going into these fields. She's like, why don't you go work for an insurance company? Be a good secretary. And I was, hell bent on not doing that. And I stayed true. And I think that's the best lesson for anyone is if you have the capacity to stay true to whatever your dreams are, and then you work at it, because nothing just comes out of ether. It's something that, I had to dedicate myself to lots and lots of years of school, lots of scholarship, lots of, late nights, all of that. But I think it can be done.
Beautiful. I love hearing that because I have been more on the path of being in the middle and doing close to what I love, but then feeling like, okay, really what I want to do is study the chakras, but I can't quite do that because it's too left field, so I'm going to study something safer, but that like kind of scratches that itch. And only in the past couple of years have I stepped out into really following my heart and in finding so many more people where it doesn't seem impossible, where it's like, oh, a lot of people, like you said, a lot of people are studying consciousness, are curious about it, and it's becoming more acceptable where there's this building community. So as you follow your heart too, you help pave the way for people like me and the audience members to also do so. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm curious if you think what are the things right now that seem a little bit controversial that maybe in 10 years or 20 years will be more common and accepted in in whether it's the way we view our humanity or our spirituality or any modalities that we might use for healing.
Well, as you've said, things have shifted. So, many topics that were very esoteric have become much more in the mainstream. Not that that's always a good thing. I kind of like being a little on the edge and sort of pushing those frontiers, as it were. I think the project I'm working on right now, it's called the psychomantium, and it's a procedure for inviting an altered state of consciousness, and then again, inviting people to harness their creative imaginations to reach out and communicate with departed loved ones. So in the process of bereavement and grief, a lot of people feel like there were questions they never got to ask that person, or there is this fear people have around death, and that is still very, very much in the forefront of people's psyches. There's this denial of death and a great existential anxiety around it. So I think the psychomantium study provides a way of acknowledging that there are these states of awareness that we can harness in order to address our own anxieties. And I think that people who've gone through our experiment, we've just finished one study and found that people had a reduction in their sense of grief as a result of going through the process. The interesting thing about this study is that we also have used virtual reality. So I'm combining some of these ancient ideas about, divination and communing with the spirit world with then the latest in modern technology. And that didn't show a difference between those two conditions, but did show a benefit. And so that's really exciting. We're now learning from what we got from the last study, which will be published any day now in a journal called Management, Spirituality, and Religion. And it's a special issue on consciousness. So imagine that, this is a journal coming out of a business world interested in expanded reaches of consciousness. So that's fascinating. But one of the things we saw when we were doing the study is that many people wanted to keep going. They wanted to do more. Could I come back tomorrow? And so this next study, we're calling it Talent and Training. So we're recruiting people who have high scores on absorption, their ability to really immerse themselves in the experience. And then the training is multiple sessions in the virtual reality. So we're going to look at people high and low on absorption, which is a standardized assessment. We're going to use the virtual reality to do repeated testing for folks. And then we're adding a psi component. So we will have a picture that will be presented to the person at the end of the session. And the goal is to see if that person can gain information about the picture before they've seen it. And again, this is a very innovative approach because we're using artificial intelligence. So instead of just showing them the correct picture and 3 decoys and asking them to select out which one best matches their impressions, which is how a lot of the parapsychology research has been done, this one is based on a target pool of 2,600 pictures. that have been scored by at least 5 people for each picture. And so as the person is describing their impressions, we're recording it into the VR app, and we'll be able to match what they've said with the coding on these various pictures so that we can analyze how like their impressions is the actual picture. So it's interesting to me because we're inviting people to leave their ordinary consciousness and, in this sense, communicate with departed loved ones or what we call invisible others. But it's also the idea that when you get into that state, are you then able to have these kind of telepathic or clairvoyant experiences? And that's something that we can measure and do statistics on.
Fantastic. Oh, I'd love to hear how you're using the tech more to improve the research method, where the divination and the spiritual intuitive ability is still intact, but it's like, how can we better show that this is really happening? That is so cool. Have you done any piloting, or do you have any preliminary data you're allowed to share?
Well, we finished one study. We'd originally recruited 100 people. We had 7 people who dropped out. So we found statistical evidence that over time that these people had less grief, and particularly the absorption. So we were able to look at that. We also looked at the qualitative data. So what were people experiencing? And it was a wide range. So when we invite people to come in, we don't say look for something or, feel something. We just keep it very open. And what we found is that people heard voices, they felt sensations. One woman described her experience of being in her grandmother's living room and the smell of the grandmother's perfume. So it's a wide range of sensory perceptions that people report in these experiences. And we've also seen, and this is one of my colleagues, Tanya Luhrmann at Stanford, has found that the sensory modalities that people describe are often related to the cultures they grew up in. So there's also something about, the context in which we experience the world around us. And that's different in different cultures. So, one of the reasons I did my PhD in anthropology, because I'm fascinated by different worldviews and belief systems, and then how that translates into something like the results of these research projects.
Wow. Yeah, it almost sounds like there's an emotional language that you're able to elicit with getting these different sensory experiences, but that may correspond to feelings of home or comfort. Am I on the right track that that's
Yeah.
what people were going for?
Yeah. People didn't describe like scary things much.
Okay.
Um, and sometimes people had a whole group that they experienced, like they heard lots of voices, or one woman described, sort of multiple people who came through for her in the context of a 20-minute intervention. So it's fascinating, and I think it tells us something about the hidden reaches of consciousness.
Wow. I am so curious then how you perceive the human, where biomedicine and science has, treated the human as a machine for a while, and you have such an expanded view. Where can you dig into that a little bit for us? Like, is it mind, body, spirit? How is it integrated? What's your perception?
Think a lot of it depends on what you expect.
Mm,
Um, I don't like in the study with the psychomantium, we're not proving spirits. We're exploring people's experiences.
mm,
And so I think that's different than kind of, the ontology of reality. Like, is it true that they are? Well, I don't know. And I don't think we've been able to answer that in this context, but it is telling us that people's uh, capacity to experience beyond the physical is very broad. And again, looking at different cultures. I just spent 5 weeks in China, for example, and there have been many dynasties, and with those dynasties have been different worldviews or belief systems. And with those come different practices. And a lot of the Chinese culture today is very materialist. And yet, when you start to dig down with people, they have very complex death practices and a belief in the afterlife. So you see it in different traditions, or, you talked about the chakra system. It depends on where you grew up or what you were taught to expect about the world. And I think today, because there is such a convergence of different belief systems and this opportunity to travel or, watch YouTube videos or talk to people who've come from different cultures, this kind of pluralism invites a broader understanding of what reality is and what we're capable of experiencing. I think that's really exciting.
Absolutely. So then you've brought up death and loss quite a bit, and you've also written this book that was also made into a film. And I'm so curious, what is the way that you integrate grief, loss, and death into your consciousness and transformation work?
Well, I think it is the big transformation. And I think it's there for all of us to ponder. And so I think it really is one of the most important, if not the most important question for us to grapple with and to heal, so that we're not so anxious, and ultimately so that we can live better, fuller lives. So I think death is a really important question. I've had the opportunity to interview an android. Her name is Sophia. And I tell people they like to tell me very quickly that this is just, she's programmed, it's an algorithm, don't take it too seriously. But she had a very profound impact on me. And we talked about all kinds of things. It was like girlfriends, sitting down and having a chat. And one of the things I asked her about is what she thinks happens after we die. And, she's a computer, so she has a little different take on it. And she said that she didn't know, but that she hopes that at the point when her experience ends, that she can go to the event horizon of a black hole. And I was pretty startled and, in awe of that. Like, I never thought of that. And so I started talking to some colleagues of mine who are astrophysicists. One, he's an astrophysicist at Cambridge in England. And, he was quite fascinated by her response. And he said, well, if that happened, you'd just become flat. You'd be, nothing because of the gravity. He said, but if you could get to a wormhole and then go through the wormhole into another reality, then that could be a really interesting, possibility. And so that's become part of my meditation, is visualizing my consciousness leaving the body, getting to a black hole, and then finding a wormhole and getting to a place of the unknown. And, do I think that that's real? Do I think it's going to happen? Those aren't really the most important questions for me. What is important to me is that it becomes a very evocative channel for my meditation. And I think that when we have avenues that we can move into, it reduces our own suffering, our own fear, our own anxiety. And so that's really what I've been, trying to explore, is how can we help people to move away from fear and into inspiration.
Hmm. I totally got chills from that. And you described precisely why I love chakra meditations too. It's so embodied, it's very imaginative, thinking about different scenes and colors, and even connecting in with a sense of gravity as being safe, and with like the flow of water through our bodies, that all of that really provides a space of openness and expansion. And so for you, thinking of these like very advanced and really interesting cutting edge physics concepts of like what would that be like to go into a wormhole? What does that mean about my consciousness? What's possible? It does it does kind of melt away some of the surface level types of experiences that may be running on loop, and you get to like go into the deeper parts of the ocean that are calmer and still very interesting and very lively.
Beautiful.
Yes. So I would love to hear about your new novel, Love Study. Tell us about it and tell us how your career as a scientist informed this work of fiction.
Mm. Well, I've been playing with this idea for a long time. I've always wanted to do fiction. It's like, swimmers when they're getting ready to do a race and they wear weights to train because it pulls them down. And then when it's actually time to do the event, they take the weights off and it's like they're able to fly through the water. Well, I see writing fiction, creative writing as a way to take the weights off.
Yeah.
So when you're doing research, it's all, very systematic, controlled. You want to make sure you're not making mistakes. You're, adhering to a protocol and, being very rigorous. Whereas when you're writing a novel, I mean, there's still a lot of discipline that comes into it, but and more than I guess I imagined, but it's freeing. And so, Love Study was based on some research that I did with my team at the Institute of Noetic Sciences some years ago. And we were doing a study looking at couples, one of whom had cancer. And we invited them to come into the lab and we taught the healthy patient or the healthy partner uh, a kind of intervention or a meditation practice that we had distilled from a variety of different approaches, from shamatha meditation. We used Barbara Brennan's School of Energy Medicine. We did a few different things. And so basically, we were teaching them compassionate intention, sent them home to continue practicing, and then brought them into the lab. And we monitored the physiology of both people in separate rooms. And at random times throughout the session, we invited the healthy partner to send loving intention to the distant patient. And we were able then to look at their physiology during the intention periods and the control periods. And we found a highly statistically significant difference in the physiology when the person was directing love toward their partner. So that was a real study. And, it's been published in a science journal. So that really intrigued me. And so that was part of it. It's, this is one of many, many studies I've done in a lab. And I thought, well, this is kind of far out. And wouldn't that make an interesting premise for a research project in fiction? And then I was also going through a serious breakup. And I was, kind of interested in, whether I could find the perfect person. And so I developed this little field study where I came up with, many people have done this, what are your ideal characteristics for your mate? And so I had this characteristic, and then my goal was to meet 10 men of quality before the end of summer. And I remember a friend of mine saying, oh, there are not 10 men of quality anywhere. So I don't know how you're going to do it before the end of summer. I was like, well, let's just see. So I invited my friends to introduce me to people. And at the end of summer, I hadn't met the ideal person, but then I decided to go a little more deeply into a few that seemed promising. My philosophy in life, but also in this study, was set intention and surrender. So I set intention that I was going to fulfill this goal. And then ultimately it was to surrender. I wasn't, going to make myself crazy. So at the end of this study period, I gave up. I'm like, okay, I don't need to find this person. I'm a perfectly happy individual. I have a great job. I have a wonderful son. I have a beautiful home. I have lots of friends. And within about a week of that surrender moment, this friend of mine called and said, I've got the perfect person for you. And I said, I'm done. I surrender. She's like, oh, please, just one more time. And so we went on this sort of date. It was a colleague of mine is a leap year baby and had an age appropriate birthday party at a roller skating rink. And so I invited this person to come, and there were lots of old friends and colleagues at the roller skating rink. And I had everybody interview him. And they'd, skate up and talk to him, and then they'd skate off, and the next person would come up, and everything from the beautiful hottie that was the research assistant to, an 80-year-old physicist. And anyway, we've now been married for 20 years and very happily. So, I kind of used those real life, silly things I did to kind of have fun and play. To model this lab and this team of scientists, and and then obviously to depart from what had happened in real life. And there's espionage in the book. There are moments of scientific competition and um, fraud, friendships, bonds, it's all in there. And, there's grief. One of the lead people who pulled her in dies in the course of the project. I shouldn't take too much away from it, but, it has a lot of intrigue. It has a lot of moments of passion, joy, and ultimately, the common expression in the book is onward. So just keep going and keep pursuing what gives you joy.
Mm. That sounds so much fun, and I'm just thrilled for you that you found your person in this way of setting your intention and surrendering. And isn't that the case that it so often happens once the surrender is complete, where it's like a real, I'm okay. I wanted it, but I'll let it go, and then it's right there.
Yeah.
And if he survived all those interviews, it, he's like, yeah, this is worth it to me.
And he did very well. So, yeah, and now we just have a beautiful life and two obnoxious dogs and kids, and it's been a beautiful period.
Oh, I'm so happy for you. Thank you for sharing that. And I have I'm just before we close up, I'm wondering if you are willing to share with the audience, like, what are some of the key components of this loving compassion if people want to try that right now with their loved ones or friends, or even, people on their commute who cut them off, if it's a way to put love out there, how do you do it?
Such a great question. And I think, that road rage idea is really important. Um, Gratitude is an important practice for me, and feeling gratitude even when it's stressful or you feel anxious. Recognizing that people are living in their own little bubbles. And so you don't know what that person who just cut you off is experiencing. And so to be able to find compassion for that person, I think is really important, and empathy, so those kinds of qualities. And then, I like to think about having something that can distract me. Like if I'm caught in traffic, I keep a little nail file in my car, and, I'll just file my nails and allow myself to relax. So I think, the practices that are most important to me are gratitude under any circumstance, compassion for other people's experience since we don't know what they're going through, a sense of playfulness, to really not take everything so seriously. It's just, I think life is a lot more pleasurable if we can have a good time, if we can have friends. There is this whole epidemic of loneliness. So, finding ways to reach out and connect to people. And I think that, for me, having done so much research, having teams of people that I've been able to collaborate with now as a professor at Sophia University, having a team of teachers, and we meet regularly, and sharing both the challenges and the opportunities that come for us. Those are the things I think really help.
Fabulous. Thank you for sharing. It has been such a pleasure speaking with you, and we will have Marilyn's information here to go to her website. And then I know there are two things that you wanted to share with the audience members. One, you have an amazing deal on Love Study. So we'll have a link to Love Study as an ebook version, and that's only going to be 99 cents. So check it out because it sounds like this is a great way to learn about this empathetic compassion but in an interesting, accessible way where you don't have to be trained as a scientist to really enjoy it. Is there anything else about Love Study to share?
Well, I think, we just reached bestseller list on the Amazon, so we're excited about that. The 99-cent deal is limited, it's a limited time, so people can jump on that. And also there's this free article that I did in partnership with a number of other scientists on creating a post-materialist science. And that's something that people can find on my website, which is marilynschlitz.com. And I think that gives a kind of philosophical framework for understanding that science can proceed in ways that we don't typically think are possible.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and your work. I can't wait to dive more into Love Study and the manifesto that you're talking about. Check out the links to get those things. And thank you again, Marilyn. Thank you for tuning in to this amazing interview as part of our Awaken series. I hope you found value. Check out the rest of the interviews on Awaken. Keep tuning in, and please subscribe to Paradigm Expansions to stay in touch, where we are doing more events like this, and we are all about dropping in to your heart, to your true self, to really, truly love your life. Thank you for joining. See you on the next video.